اضطريت اكل من الزباله ونام بالشوارع، ما عندي محل، ما عندي مصاري لحتى استاجر بيت نام فيه او اسكن مع حدا. فمشان هيك اضطريت نام بالشوارع، يعني تعبت، وصلت مرحله كمان تعبت اعصابي، يعني ما عندي مصاري لحتى اخذ دواء اعصاب.
In the freezing cold, Munir trawls through the dumpsters of Beirut, looking for anything to eat or to sell. Just 6 months ago, the 25-year-old was working as a supermarket cashier. He lived in a rented flat and had plans to marry his girlfriend. But an unprecedented financial collapse that is ravaging Lebanon destroyed all of that. As the economy went into freefall, like many businesses, the supermarket closed. With no safety net, Munir is now sleeping rough. He makes the equivalent of just under a British pound a day, selling plastic bottles for recycling.
لأن صرت أشوف غيري عم يشتغل على الزبالة واشتغل من الزبالة، وأمرار آكل من الزبالة لما ما يكون في شغل ويكبوا بلاستيك ومواد إعادة ريسايكل تدوير. اضطريت آكل من الزبالة ونام بالشوارع، ما عندي محل، ما عندي مصاري لحتى استأجر بيت نام فيه أو اسكن مع حدا. فمشان هيك اضطريت نام بالشوارع، يعني تعبت، وصلت مرحله كمان تعبت اعصابي، يعني ما عندي مصاري لحتى اخذ دواء اعصاب قد ما فينا يعني.
Munir is not alone. People digging through bins is now a common sight in Lebanon's cities. As we talk, another person comes to the same dumpster, also looking for plastic. Both Munir and the second young man realise others have come before them. Most of the sellable recycled rubbish has already been taken. Under these circumstances, Munir says the situation is so desperate, many won't survive.
إجمالاً كان عندي طموح أنا كمان، يعني حتى أصير إنه شيء منيح وأتجوز وأعمل مستقبل بهالبلد وأشتغل، بس الشيء اللي وصلونا إياه يأسونا. تعبنا كتير بهالبلد، بس لربما الله كريم وبيمشي الحال، يعني بترجع الأزمة إنه إذا راحوا على طبق السياسة، طبق المنظومة الفاسدة، إذا بشيلوها بيمشي الحال.
Lebanon was once a country nicknamed the Paris of the Middle East, but it is now in the grips of one of the worst economic collapses in modern history, according to the World Bank. The global body has blasted the country's ruling class for orchestrating the crisis, pointing to decades of chronic mismanagement and corruption. This nightmare first grew from successive governments piling up debts following the civil war which raged between 1975 and 1990. Later, economists likened Lebanon's financial system to a nationally regulated Ponzi scheme. New money was borrowed to pay existing debt, which has spiraled. And so the economy began to freefall, sparking a mass uprising in 2019. Conditions only worsened with the arrival of the pandemic in 2020. Then in August of that year, one of the single largest non-nuclear explosions in history destroyed swathes of Beirut. It killed more than 200 people and caused billions of pounds worth of damage. Alongside all of these pressures, the lira lost more than 90% of its value, sending prices soaring. In the space of a year, the cost of food more than quintupled, while the price of medicines has gone up sixfold. The government cannot afford to provide state power, leaving families literally in the dark. The United Nations says more than 3/4 of the country now live under the poverty line. In real terms, it means families cannot afford food, electricity, petrol, medicines and heating. It has left the majority, from the most vulnerable to the middle class, destitute. Well, this crisis is probably most keenly felt here in Tripoli, Lebanon's poorest city, where even before the financial collapse, more than 60% of the population were living under the poverty line. That desperation is acutely felt right now, so much so that this coastal town has become a departure point for people desperate to get to Europe. In this neighbourhood of Tripoli, we spoke to several families who've either tried the treacherous sea crossing to Europe or are planning to in the future. A place in a rickety boat costs upwards of £700 per person. Some neighbourhoods club together all their savings to fund a single trip. Among those who went is Shahid, who got to Cyprus last year only to be turned around and deported home. A delivery driver, he told us he could no longer even afford the petrol to run his scooter. Desperate to support his family, he sold his mother's wedding ring, his bike, borrowed some money and left.
بابا معنا شيء ابدا، فضعنا نحن بالمي ضلينا 4 ايام ضايعين، ولا معنا اكل ولا معنا مي. ففي وحده كانت حبلة معنا وبشهرة فزعة ما بعرف شو صار معها، سقطت يعني نزل الصبي ميت. واللهم صل على سيدنا محمد. وصلنا نحن لهونيك في واحد بالباخرة، عملنا انه الطريق هيك، وقت سألنا كذا باخرة يعني ضلنا على الطريق. فتنا على قبرص، عدنا 18 يوم جوا، عشنا 18 يوم زل جوا.
Unable to log an asylum claim, they were soon deported by the Cypriot authorities to Lebanon, as is often the case. But Shahid and his friends are determined to try once more.
So even though you nearly died the first time, you would actually risk your life again?
وهلا وبكره وبعدين بدها تصح لي، لو بدي روح سباحه بدي ارجع اطلع.
There are now other worrying developments that could impact the security of the country. After years of civil war, conflicts with Israel, and violent domestic turmoil, the army has been considered an anchor for stability, but the currency collapse means an enlisted soldier now earns the equivalent of less than £45 per month. Officers' salaries are higher, but have also dropped in value to about £100 a month. We travelled to Akkar, which is adjacent to Tripoli, where historically a large proportion of the population have signed up. Serving officers could not speak to us on camera, but we interviewed military veterans whose pensions are now worth as little as £35 a month. Mohammed, a retired first lieutenant, says they're reduced to camping in their own homes. The father of 9, who spent 35 years in service, explains how he now has to boil water on a makeshift barbecue to shower and cook. There is no state electricity and they cannot afford a generator or cooking gas. He says active soldiers can't even travel to their jobs because the cost to get them there is so high.
يعني إذا بدك توصل على شغله بده مئات الآلاف توصل على شغله العسكري. شو بده معاش وشو بده يأدي أجر طرقات وشو بده يصامد منه حليب لأولاده وحفاضات للأولاد الصغيرة مثلا، وباقي بتعرفي شو كذا البيت شو بده مصروف خبز وأكل وما بعرف شو. ما في كهرباء، ما في الاشتراك. أبقى فيك تدوري كمان ما في اشتراكات، ما في. إذا بدك تدوري اشتراك بدك تدفعي ملايين تدوري اشتراكات مثلا.
Economists who have long warned about the collapse say there is no end in sight to the misery, as the government and financial institutions have resisted serious and much-needed reforms. The current cabinet, headed up by Najib Mikati, denies it's doing nothing, saying it has inherited Lebanon's woes. Mr. McCarthy has instead pointed to ongoing talks with the International Monetary Fund for a bailout, a push for elections in May, and efforts to build an economic recovery plan.
The prediction will really depend on what the political class or what the people who are in charge are going to do. There is no limit for how things can go bad. However, it only needs like a will. It only needs a real political will to do things right. So yes, Lebanon is a small country. Lebanon has a lot of resources, but Lebanon is unfortunately hostage of a political class.
As institutions crumble and cease to operate, more people like Munir are forced to rummage through the bins to find any way to live. And so for now, he's reduced to sleeping in an abandoned building site. After a long day trawling through dumpsters, he takes us there.
من إمتى؟
من شهر واحد.
Okay, so he's saying that he's
وشهر.
for a month. So he said he's been here basically for a month, sleeping here. وكل البليل يعني
أنا بجي بنام هون من الساعة 9 بالليل.
Yeah.
أو الساعة 10 للصبح برجع بفل.
So he comes here at about 9 to 10 in the evening and then he leaves in the morning.
بكرة إنه بصير معي شي مرة ساعتها بموت، وأنا ما عم بقدر يعني إنه لاقي محل غير نام فيه. هيدا المحل الوحيد والأمين بالليل. مشانك.
Sick, exhausted and alone, in a country where there are no shelters and there is no relief, Munir is on the verge of collapse. Unless there is drastic change or a miracle, for thousands like him, there is little hope.